Profile share via email report story. Watching the ship wasn't as boring as Nico. Robin thought it'd be. Her afternoon was spent immersing herself in a thick novel about fishmen's history, and she quite enjoyed it, seeing how she finished the entirety of the first book without putting it down. She owned the whole set of its past, and the thought of reading the second one thrilled her. But the archaeologist found it better to take a break on reading to enjoy the art above her. The sky was no longer its usual light blue whenever it's day, but a prettier shade of orange and pink. The sunset's hue in its own setting on the horizon was gorgeous as well. It left the ocean to glisten beautifully, and as she smiled at the scenery, a figure climbed up the ship's plank, and Robin assumed it was Nami. The older woman had been informed of the tangerine lover's precedency, but, instead of a woman, it was a man. A man who was not part of the Straw Hats, and, indeed, a stranger. He did look odd, too. On top of his unusual outfit, he carried a great amount of bags that reminded her of the swordsman holding tons of shopping bags for the navigator. But it wasn't bags from fashionable brands, it was bags filled with bread and fruit. He looked innocent enough, but she couldn't let him set foot on the Thousand Sunnies so comfortably. She moved her arms across her chest to make an X, and let two arms grow behind his back. Clutch was just about to be used on the man, but hearing the navigator's voice stopped her. Robin, it's okay. He's with me. Emerging from the ship was the crew's thief with a worried glance for the male brunette. I met him at a bakery, she explained. Before bowing at the older woman, he put down all the bags. He, somehow, was able to carry all at once. I'm sorry for the intrusion. I only came to drop off Nami's things and collect some tangerines. Robin formed a grin when getting a closer look at his bizarre fashion choice, but was also quite surprised at the last words he spoke. Tangerines. Nami is extremely strict when it comes to someone even going remotely near her bushes, and she never allows for the sweet fruits to be touched. The mycons being picked was no exception either, and anyone who dares to carelessly rip the fruit off the branch will be paid with stomping feet at the stomach and an enormous debt. What's so different about this stranger that he is able to get some of her oranges? The navigator might let her crew mates have a slice of the fruit, but never a basket worth of them. As the male brunette headed to her grove, Nami stopped him and set some rules. Robin stared away as the man watched the tangerine lover pick away at the mycons that were ripe. Robin smiled at the constant asking of, "Let me pick one, at least," and she responding with an angry, "No," to get her point across. The older woman should have known that, of course, he would never be allowed to touch the fruit until it was picked by her. The basket that Nami, carefully, placed the mycons inside wasn't so big but small. Only 5 were able to fit. Even though it was such a small amount, the man appreciated being given her grown fruit. Nami picked up the basket and gave it to him. "Here you go. You should have known I wouldn't give you so many. Ah, and no take backs. I'm keeping all of your fruit." Robin eyed the pile of watermelons, strawberries, apples, and peaches. The quantity of each had a high amount. "No worries. Being able to try your famous tangerines is an honor. I'll say it in advance that my nephew says, thank you." The brunette waved goodbye at the archaeologist, passed by the pile of bags, and left the ship with a jump on the sand. He sure looked like he was in a hurry to leave. The whole encounter was a blur, and she really was curious as to what kind of person he is. She wished he stayed longer. What a shame. I'd really wanted to know more about him. It's very unlikely of you to bring a stranger on board. Nami nodded at her statement. But it must be because he fairly resembles Luffy that you trust him so much. Promoted stories. You'll also like Over the New World, 25.3K 495. Luffy x Nami fanfict. Finding an island was absolutely necessary after an attack from Admiral Fujitora. Sunny had gone through a lot of damage and Frankie wanted to repa. Dream OpEx reader. 52.3K 2.5K. When one looks back to their childhood, one remembers the vivid springs of laughter, climbing trees and reaching out for the stars, and making flower crowns in fields of. My Swordsman, Zoro X Reader. 9.5K 353. Roronoa Zoro found himself struck by the girl who served customers their meals with a genuine smile. YN, such a pure soul, found herself soon on a pirate ship with her. Ultimate Devil Fruit, One Piece Fanfic. 197K 6.1K. Clarity lived a fairly normal life, at least she did until she was thrown into the world of devil fruits and pirates. Stuck in the grasps of her own hell for over 10 years. My Captain Soft-Side, Luffy x Nami. 6.1K 80. As Nami is working in her room, she decides to take a small break so she walks out and looks at the sea. After a few minutes she looks at the place Luffy is usually sitting. 3D2YA One Piece Fanfic. 372K 6.2K. Luffy stumbles upon Nami by chance on a small island after the crew was separated at Sabayati Archipelago. The two decide to train together, but then comes the warm, weird. Youngest crewmate, One Piece. 1.8K 62. What if Zoro wasn't Luffy's first crewmate? A young girl in need of love and a family and a certain rubber team cross paths. Reader as a kid, only platonic relatio. Her last sentence made the navigator flinch. No way, they're nowhere near alike. Robin chuckled. Maybe not, but his face is slightly similar in a way. You can't deny that. Nami crossed her arms and refused to agree, murmuring her denial. But the two women stopped their talk when hearing the shipwright's voice. Ow, there's our navigator. Minutes after the bread lover's departure, Frankie and Chopper arrived shortly after, each carrying supplies of their own, such as cola and metal plus herbs and bandages. The reindeer ran to the tangerine lover and hugged her legs tightly. Nami looked down with confusion. Thank you, Nami. She registered his words in her head, figuring out what she was being thanked for. It wasn't until the two showed her an envelope of their names written that she knew what he was talking about. Chopper took Frankie's envelope to retrieve the leftover money and did the same with his to hand it to the treasurer. Here you go. In his left hand was the shipwright's unused $50 and in the right was Chopper's $65. The navigator stared at the money with a raised brow and looked back at Robin, seeing if she knew why they were giving money back. The other two crewmates were then confused at Nami's confusion and also looked back at the archaeologist for an answer. And an answer they will get. Nami-san, they were in disbelief when receiving so much money from you and thought if they spent it all and didn't give you back more than $50, they'll be punished. Their nods proved her correct. As for Chopper and Frankie, Nami did not expect for you to give her back money but allowed for you to spend it to your heart's desire. And, oh, came out of the three's mouths and laughed when understanding what the other thought. Bacchus, I don't want it back. Keep it, she said through an amused smile. You better keep that unused money out of my sight or I might change my mind. With that being said, the doctor stuffed his bills in his backpack while the shipwright returned the money back to the envelope and hid it behind his enormous, metal body. But Nami, the ship's pet said, why, you never ever give us so much. You looked kinda mad in the morning so we all thought the most we'd get is $15. Oh yeah, truth is, the moment Nami stepped into the bread maniac's home, her lingering anger from this morning was forgotten. She hadn't thought about it once as she ate pastries and played with his nephew. Really, she did not have an exact reason as to why she was generous with the distribution of money today when she wasn't in a great mood to begin with. No, of course she had a reason. After storming out of the kitchen, she laid in bed replaying scenes where she's acted like an annoying bitch and she can recall plenty of times. She wondered what she can do to reduce her usual selfishness, and for starters, the first thing would be money. As much as she wished she didn't have to share treasure or cash, it had to be done, and when she did share it'd be an evil, small amount. She felt pathetic having to change a known part of herself, but it was for the sake of gaining the title of friends with her captain again, thus leading to giving away $150 to each member. Robin refused an envelope, and Nami was sure it was because the older woman saw the clear pain in the navigator's expression when handing out more than $100 so easily. At least Nami saved $150. Of course, she'd never explain the actual reason to her two crewmates. Does it really matter anymore? Don't question and just remember this day well. Frankie and Chopper exchanged glances, knowing something was wrong. Although Frankie wanted to ask her another question, he couldn't when hearing the bickering of a swordsman and cook. I don't give a damn that the island is big. That has nothing to do with the fact that I told you we're going to keep walking straight ahead and then you make a sudden left turn. A left turn. Here I thought you don't know the difference between left and right, but you don't even know what straight ahead means. You're such a dumbass. First to appear on deck was Sanji, who had his head turned back to continue yelling at Zoro. Oi, why are you even so mad, shitty cook? Isn't that a good thing? We didn't have to be near each other at all today. Next was the Marimo, who was too busy rolling his eyes to look at the curly-brow blonde. This time, Sanji's back didn't face Zoro anymore. The cook did a 180 and sneered at his rival. I couldn't successfully carry Robin's deed because of you, that's why. He spun back around, heading to the kitchen with hands full of groceries. As he did so, he passed by a pile of fruits and put down his bought groceries to examine them. Something about these fruits were unlike any other, and on top of that, it was perfectly ripe. He noted to cut up some watermelons and strawberries as dessert tonight. Sanji-kun. Nami caught his attention with the call of his name, in which Sanji swiftly turned his head to with eyes resembling hearts. Do you mind putting those away for me? Any favor asked by a sexy, beautiful female would always be done. That is Sanji Vinsmoki's logic. In each hand, he held several bags holding peaches and strawberries, while the other held bags full of watermelon and apples. He walked over to the kitchen with a giddy smile, for he wasn't able to lay his eyes upon her or hear her lovely voice at all today. Before the cook could enter the kitchen's door, Zoro murmured, "She has you on a leash, Arrow Cook." He would have landed at least one kick to the swordsman's stomach, but thought of something that didn't resort to violence. Throw an insult, that'll definitely shut him up. Of course she does. I love Nami Swan so much that I even bought plenty of sake just for her to enjoy. And Zoro screamed a, "What?" after realizing what that curly-brow blonde was trying to say. Zoro stole a glance at Nami, who shot an evil grin at him. You better share that liquor, woman. She put a hand out, still holding her grin. With a price, of course. He squinted at her to then click his tongue. TCH, and I thought you were acting nice for once. My kind card expires after a nice act every 100 years. As she said that, she forgot she was supposed to act nice now, but wasn't about to stumble her words in front of this man. During Nami and Zoro's small talk, Chopper sat in front of the plank, waiting for the rest of the crew to arrive. Robin and Frankie stood next to the reindeer, while the cyborg chatted about his day with the older woman, smiling at his story. The sun, at that point, was close to setting completely, ready to reveal the starry sky and its crescent moon. The doctor, noticing the shift in light, became worried, since Usopp, Brook, and Luffy were still not here, as day was about to change tonight. But his worries were gone when seeing a long-nosed pirate and skeleton flying across the sky, straight onto the ship, specifically straight on the spot Chopper was sitting at. Frankie scooped up the doctor and Robin used her Hana powers to create a hand with her duplicate limbs so the two crewmates would land safely. As her net-like creation was complete, Usopp and Brook flew into her connected arms resembling a hand, making them feel no harsh impact. As Frankie and Robin were distracted with the sharpshooter and musician, another person flew in the sky due to slingshotting himself with his Gomu Gomu powers. It did not end well for Luffy's body slammed onto Nami's, forcing her head to hit hard onto the deck. Zoro, who was right next to the Tangerine Lover, backed away slowly, knowing well enough what would come next. But he did not take notice of the 5-second stare they shared with each other before Nami pushed him off of him. Her first instinct would have been to shove her captain by punching his cheek, but when her left hand tried pushing Luffy's body away from hers, his right hand gripped onto her left arm, stopping her action to just stare at her. But Nami saw it as observing instead of simply staring. It was like his eyes dived deep within her own eyes to figure out what she's feeling. She knew Luffy was capable to read through her if he tried, so she inverted her eyes away from his and successfully got him off of her. Her soft expression could easily be read, but not when she's upset. Arg, seriously, Luffy, if you're going to slingshot yourself to the sunny, make sure you don't land on anyone, me specifically. She rubbed the back of her head that slightly ached. Geez, you're so careless. The crew silently chuckled at the scene before them, glad to see Nami act like her usual self. Even though being shouted out was never a pleasant feeling, Luffy still smiled. He took his hat off his head to place it onto Nami's orange hair. The island was so much fun, Nami. The food was just as good as Sanji's. He ignored the fact he was being yelled at and acted as if he was having a casual conversation with his navigator. HMPH. His radiant smile and wide, happy eyes did no effect in turning her frown upside down. Moreover, his friendliness pissed her off. Does he want to remain friends with her or not? The whole point in her acting kind is to win back their previous relationship. Does she have to try any more? Then a thought struck her. Don't tell me he didn't mean he didn't want to be friends. What if I said I didn't want to be friends? Unless he meant something more. Nami, come on, don't ignore me. His cheeks contorted to a pout. Is it because you're mad at me? 'Cause if it is, I'm really sorry. She let out the lightest of chuckles. Luffy, do you even know what you're apologizing for? Of course, she was given a shake of his head and sighed. Her hand reached for his left cheek and stretched it as much as she could when walking a fair distance away from him, only to let it go, which snapped back harshly back to his face. OWWW. He rubbed his cheek while watching her walk away from him, entering the aquarium. His head spun to his crewmates. I thought everything would be fine if I said, sorry. Blank, underscore. Once again, dinner was as rowdy as ever. The loudness of talk among the crew did not get any quieter. Bits of food flew from mouths, small fights of shoving a rubber man away erupted, and Sanji yelled at the men to have some manners. Tonight's seating arrangement was of Frankie and Chopper on both ends of the dining table. Zoro and Robin sat next to each other while across from them was Luffy and Nami. Next to Zoro and Luffy was Brook and Usopp. As soon as Zoro was unable to properly protect his food, Nami's mood quickly changed when knowing the great amount of booze the cook had bought and so challenged her friend to a drinking contest. He never refused any of her requests because 1. Free booze and 2. Free booze. As soon as Sanji placed 8 bottles each to the swordsman and navigator, the two exchanged knowing smirks as they hurriedly reached for a bottle to down as fast as they could. After 3 bottles, Zoro couldn't help but point out Nami's unfinished plate. Boy, Luffy, I see you staring at that witch's plate. Nami put down her half-finished fourth bottle to offer her food to her captain. You can have it, Luffy. Her eyes shifting from her sake to his concentrated eyes on her food. He slowly looked up from the barely eaten plate to only stare at Sanji's back, who was engrossed in perfectly slicing the gifted watermelon. His eyes then wandered back to the dining table and met her eyes for only a split second, before watching his first mate chug his third bottle. She, I don't want it. Nami was just about to reply to him, but Zoro stealing her fourth bottle stopped her from doing so. Originally, Robin had expected for the other half side of the table to be far more entertaining. Frankie thought so, too, which explains why he left his initial seat to hang out with the three after finishing his share of dinner. Although, she planned on pointing out all flaws to Usopp's perfectly crafted plan to tease the younger one, Luffy's stiffness grabbed her attention away from the long-nosed pirate. His quietness was not ordinary, and his fixated gaze on, specifically, Nami's plate was odd. The captain's plate was left untouched, so there should be no reason for him to want hers after not eating his very own plate. After slouching on his seat, constantly looking back at Nami and then the plate, and throwing frowns around every now and then, his hand reached out to touch Nami's plate. But it wasn't the food he touched, it was the bottom of the plate itself. Peeking underneath the glass dish was a folded piece of paper, most definitely a note. This time, instead of shifting his gaze to the tangerine lover then back at the plate, he stared stiffly at the note. It was almost as if he knew that his behavior wasn't the usual and that someone will bound to notice if he stayed acting weird long enough. Robin was sure he hoped it'd be Nami to notice his silence, though technically Robin noticed far too early. It was Zoro that spoke about it first. She studied him for no longer than 15 minutes and knew, after Nami's attention was stripped away from him, he grew impatient. He even decided to cross his arms, looking as if Sanji refused to give him any sort of meat that day. The older woman glanced at the navigator who, too, was glancing towards Luffy's direction while swinging back her head to chug the sake faster than the swordsman. The archaeologist knew Nami would talk to him that very moment, but also knew Luffy would give up waiting that very moment as well. And of course, her captain's name didn't roll off her tongue when watching him walk away with an irritated expression on. Oh my, she whispered to herself. So very close. Blank, underscore, blank. The massive amount of watermelon that was given to the Straw Hats had been devoured in not even over 8 minutes. During that short time, Frankie asked Luffy to hold a bowl from the farthest corner and hurriedly ate a large slice in 3 seconds. He stood up on one of the chairs and spit out the seeds in a rainbow curve to then land into the bowl. Idiots impress idiots, so Frankie pretty much impressed all the men on board. Robin watched Luffy distractingly throw glances back at his plate, wanting to take back the note that instant. But the female devil fruit user wouldn't allow for that to happen. Why not help him fulfill what he originally wanted to do? She decided to guide Nami in realizing she was given a note indirectly by her captain. After Sanji's fit of laughter at Frankie's act, he began to go around the table to collect the finished plates. Robin knew this was a perfect time to show the navigator what she missed earlier. Cook-san, do you mind if I help you with the dishes? Her smile sent flutters to the blonde's heart. Of course, Robin Kwan. She stood up from her seat, picking up her plate and aiming to pick up Nami's. She took note of the tangerine lover staring into space at her captain's direction. A tap to the shoulder snapped Nami from her thoughts. Nami, may I take your plate? Oh yes, go ahead, Robin. Nami took her plate off the table and handed it to the older woman. With no plate hiding the note underneath, the folded paper was right in front of her eyes now. Robin grinned and turned her head to her captain, who stared with widened eyes at his archaeologist, knowing she had just helped him out. His eyes softened and threw a wide smile at her direction, returning back to the rest of the crew without feeling anxious. The older woman shifted her gaze to the navigator, who stared questioningly at the note. What the? Her hands picked up the note and unfolded it, her eyes following the messy handwriting all the way to the end that finished with a bad drawing of the Straw Hat's Jolly Roger. But she found it cute. She folded it back to when it was in its original state and stuffed in her back pocket. Her body forced her out of her seat as Nami stared intently at her captain, grinning away at another lie Usopp was spouting. She then stared at Robin. I don't think I'll be going to the aquarium tonight. Gomen. Robin smiled as her reply and watched the navigator tell the swordsman his debt has just increased before exiting the kitchen. But her head turned to throw a glance at her captain, who was already looking her way. Nami flashed him a happy grin before closing the door shut. Luffy, too, smiled, but instead of staying put in his seat, he shot up, standing tall with a giddy grin as he threw a thumbs up at Brook and Usopp. The two knew the message and threw a thumbs up back. And just like that, Luffy followed Nami out, not aware of his faint pink cheeks, him humming a tune, Too Happy Smile, and the small box he remained hidden that night being thrown up as he constantly caught it. With those observations in light, it wouldn't take long to read the situation, and Sanji figured it out much too quick. Wait a damn minute, Luffy. Just WHO is that box for? Mugiwara did not turn his head to look at him but hurried out, knowing he'd be stopped immediately if not out of the kitchen. But on the way, he did throw out a response that only irritated the cook. For Nami, blank, underscore, blank, hey everyone. I'm very surprised I'm getting attention on my Luna story, it seriously means a lot. Almost to 1K, thank you everyone, I do hope you're all enjoying the story so far. Don't be shy to leave comments, it keeps me going lol. See you all in the next chapter, mostly coming out in December. Where stories live, discover now.